presentations.
Great.
Jim is why I'm about to throw away my camera, but this is really going to be impressive. After the presentation, we will do a short business meeting. It's not going to be long. We're going to make sure we vacate the library in good time so that the hardworking staff here is able to leave on time. So without any further ado, I'm going to have Patty, our vice president, introduce Jim, and please don't. And then I'll start the screen share.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm excited to introduce Jim. He's one of our, this way? Can you still hear me back there? Okay. Excited to introduce Jim. He's a fellow master naturalist and has been, after he retired from his business career, 10 years with William and Mary, Colonial Williamsburg, excuse me. I should look at my notes. He decided to get involved in his photography, which he's done his whole life, and became a master naturalist and tried to combine the two. So he is going to give us a presentation on photography with a focus on birds. He also spends many hours in the parks and the trails and the gardens in our areas taking photos. And he volunteers at Hospice House, the support care of Williamsburg at SCORE, mentoring small business owners, and delivering Meals on Wheels. So we're very lucky to have him. He's a busy person and takes some wonderful photographs. And hopefully he'll share some of his secrets with us. Jim.
Thank you.
Before we screen share, are you ready?
Well, I'll just say hello to everybody out there. I can see a lot of faces and some familiar ones and some new ones. And thank you for joining us today. Thank you all for coming today. So now we can, I guess, go ahead and share the screen, and working with two screens here. So forgive me if it's not quite as smooth as it might be, but we'll do our best. There we go.
And we're going to do it from slideshow. Oh, it's still loading.
Okay. Well, it's great to be here tonight. I will say it's slightly intimidating to be presenting to the Bird Club and showing birds in my presentation. You'll notice the word photography is the larger of the word up there. I'm more of a photographer than a birder. So forgive me if there are any errors, and I would really appreciate being corrected if I misidentify anything. There's at least one person in the audience here who receives many emails from me to confirm IDs of birds, and he knows who he is. But so I'll do my best to make sure we get them all right. This is, of course, chosen especially for this group. I believe it's sort of the official bird of the Williamsburg Bird Club, a red-headed woodpecker. This was along the Powhatan Creek Trail a couple of years ago. The tree is no longer standing, unfortunately, but it was really fun watching this pair, going in and out of the nest and raising their youngsters. So, okay. So I've included a few quotations in this presentation relating to photography. What I like about photographs is that they capture a moment that is gone forever, impossible to reproduce. Karl Lagerfeld said that. And in this case, it's not a moment that's being captured. It's actually 1/4000th of a second. And if you've ever tried to take pictures of hummingbirds, that's about what it takes to freeze their wings. Thank you to digital photography and our modern cameras. But again, this, as the quotation says, this really would have been impossible to reproduce. It's really difficult to see, even when this is happening. You're watching it, but obviously to see in this kind of a detail is not something that our eyes are able to see. So the objective of this presentation is, first of all, that we can only cover a small portion. Photography, like birding and like many avocations, is a lifelong learning experience. In just about an hour or so, we can only really cover a small part of it. But I'd like to pass along just a few key points to remember as you endeavor to take better photographs. And just to say that when I say better photographs or a good photograph, I mean, this photography is an art. It's not a science. It's not mathematics where there's a right and a wrong. So when I say better or good, this is my opinion, and we're all welcome to have different opinions when it comes to what makes a good photograph and what doesn't. So I'm just really passing along my own. I'll share some of my favorite photos, tell a bit about how I took them, and answer any questions you have. And if you have any questions about a specific photograph, it's going to be easier for me, I think, to answer any here in the audience, but Anne, interrupt me if there are any show up on the chat. It's just easier to do that sort of in the moment, but any general questions we'll have time at the end to ask those. So, and again, as I mentioned, the opinions expressed are those of the presenter and nobody else. There's no right or wrong when it comes to photography. So the photos you'll see today were all taken by me, primarily on the trails and parks and gardens of Williamsburg and James City County. There are a couple that are outside of this area. I'll mention those as we get to them. Almost all of them have had very minimal editing. I will mention if anything has had significant photoshopping. And they're taken with a variety of cameras. I use a Nikon D500 with a long lens. I also use the point and shoot. I use my iPhone. You really, there's an old adage in photography that the best camera you have is the one that's with you. And that's really true. I mean, the iPhones today can take incredible photos, not necessarily of a bird in flight, but if you have enough light, if you can get close enough to your subject, they just take incredible photos. Okay, so just a few of the spots I like to visit. And I know you all in this club are probably familiar with every single one of these, so I'm really not going to spend much time on this, but Green Springs and Powhatan Creek Trail. Us old timers still call it Bassett Hall Trail, but it's Bassett Trace Nature Trail, which is a great trail at Colonial Williamsburg. Jamestown Beach Park, I've been going to there a lot lately, especially over the summer, which is the beach itself, but then also the level up from there, which I believe is where your club did your big sit over this last weekend. So you get tree lines, you get fields, and you get beach. It's a great environment there. I go over to the botanical garden quite often. Birds love it there. The little garden at the marina. This is Brian Tabor. Many of you may know him, the president of the CVWO. And Brian largely single-handedly built this garden and with help from others maintains it. It's a great little garden right by the marina in James City County. So why photograph birds? Well, again, from my perspective, it's the behavior. They do so many different things, and we'll get into a lot of the activities. There are quite a few species that you walk along and you'll see them and they're basically sitting there and kind of just there. And birds do so many different things, and they do it all in view generally, that we are able to capture what they're doing. Birds are beautiful. Again, this is subjective, but they're just beautiful to look at because we can. And especially with a long lens, birds don't let us get too close generally, but they let us get close enough with a long lens to capture their various activities. And then the variety of birds. I guess there are roughly 350 species that have been recorded in the historic triangle. And you all know this. Again, I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but you, depending on the time of year, you never know what you're going to see. It's always something different. It changes with the seasons, and that's wonderful. I mean, there are many different types of animals, wildlife around here where there's one species or maybe two or three. And we've got such a variety here of birds that they're just wonderful to photograph. So again, the variety is amazing, from the little 4-inch long blue-gray netcatcher to 4 feet, the great blue heron. And there are birds, I'm sure, that are bigger, but there's from one end of the spectrum to the next right there. And from the indisputably cute dark-eyed junco to, well, maybe the not so cute, although again, this is in the eye of the beholder, but the black vulture. And I'll just say, I've seen more black vultures this summer than ever before. I don't know if that's something that you all are seeing too, and I don't know why that would be. I don't see more carrion on the side of the road, but maybe there's a reason for that, or maybe it's just where I'm spending time that there happen to be more. So, and then we have from the very peaceful and calm, this is one of my favorites, the prothonotary warbler, to the fierce and especially when they're territorial. There's a pair of osprey, one of whom belongs in this nest, and the other is sort of scoping out a different territory, but not for long, because the one scrammed pretty quickly. So it's really the variety of birds and their behaviors and activities is really quite something. So another quotation, if you see something that moves you and then snap it, you keep a moment. And Linda McCartney, who besides being married to Paul McCartney and being quite accomplished in a lot of different areas, she was a terrific photographer and has published her work. But I really love this quotation because, again, this is a pair of owlets that for a number of years was breeding along Powhatan Creek Trail. And although not for the last year or so, but I spent many, many hours there. And when I look at this picture and any one of the number of photos that I took of the pair and the owlets, it really does bring back the moment. And it's almost as if you're there again. And this is true of any photograph of an event, a family occasion, a wedding, whatever it may be. It's also true of nature photography. The action tends to happen so quickly and you enjoy it when you see it, but then to be able to go back and kind of relive and re-experience it is a real treat. So the most important things when it comes to wildlife photography, in my opinion, first of all, how many of you are golfers? Do we have any golfers in the room? A couple, okay. So golfers are generally taught, I think, 4 things: the grip, the setup, the backswing, and the follow through. And I'm sure there's more depending on who you took lessons from, but those are kind of the 4 things to think about with every swing. With photography, and especially nature photography, I've sort of identified 4 areas that I will talk about. And they are the subject, light, focus, and composition. So first off, subject. So the subject is what you are taking a photograph of. And if you have an engaging or interesting or unusual subject, like this eastern screech owl, then you're almost guaranteed a compelling photo. I mean, it's kind of tough to mess up just by virtue of the fact that this is just something really special you're seeing and photographing, and that makes it special in and of itself. Or another interesting and unusual for me subject was this western tanager, which is not normally found in this area, but over the course of several winters did make its home here in James City County and was really fun to photograph. So just a couple of examples of interesting and compelling subjects. And then when you have a more commonplace subject, which, let's face it, most of what we see is the more everyday and commonplace. Carolina chickadees are here year round, but it helps to have an unusual element in the photograph. So in this case, this is called a cracked cap polypore that she's standing on. And as I saw her on this with a little morsel of food in her bill, I couldn't help but thinking that she has found her own little dining room table on which to enjoy her meal. And so again, just a very commonplace subject, but with a little element that makes it just a little bit interesting.
How close do you have to be to get that?
That shot of the chickadee, I was probably 20 feet, so not far, not too far, but again, with a nice long lens. Another very common sighting, a red-bellied woodpecker, but just a little added element here of this nice big pecan adds some interest to the photo. And when when he turned and just gave me that pose. That was just perfect. And goldfinches, I mean, they're everywhere, but I just loved the way this one looked. This was in one of our gardens here in town, and sitting on and bending the branch. Goldfinches don't weigh very much. I remember looking it up after I took this photo. It's about the weight of, I think, 2 quarters, about the equivalent of 2 quarters. And so just enough to bend that branch a little bit. And with the nice dark background, I felt it was a pretty good photo. But again, a very commonplace subject. Again, another little extra element of a goldfinch. This is in my backyard, and the goldfinches love to take a little drink, even though I've got bird baths right there, a few feet away, but they love to drink out of the little built-in moat in the hummingbird feeder. And every once in a while, they'll lift their head up a little too quickly, and you'll see a water droplet kind of getting away. Darn, the one that got away. So just a little something extra with a commonplace subject. Now, mallards are everywhere. I mean, again, at certain times of the year, and this is the female mallard. I don't know what she's doing, but are there any practitioners of yoga here? Because I think this is called downward duck. Is that correct? Yeah, I think it is. So I might have been peeking on a little yoga session there. Okay. Subject is arguably the most important element of a photograph, and part of that is the background, and that's really worth thinking about if you're able to. I mean, in many cases, you see something, you want to photograph it, you can't just ask the bird to move. Could you move over here where there's less of a distracting background or something like that? So, but if you are lucky enough to have a choice and to think about it, or to move yourself so that something else is providing the background. This is an example of a shot that I was very happy with the goldfinch kind of munching away on seeds, but the background I found very distracting. So this is not one of my favorite shots. And then I compared it with this one where it's also a goldfinch eating seeds, but with a little bit of a more interesting background. And it's, there is content in the background, but it's blurred out. It provides a little contrast of color. And this is actually, these are globe amaranth, and it's the same flower, but in the purple in the background and the white in the foreground. So I really like the way that it sort of provided context without taking away from the emphasis on the subject. Another example of this, ruby crown kinglet. Again, these are a favorite bird to photograph, and when they give you that little nod their head at you and show their color, it's a wonderful thing. But again, I found this background just a little bit busy, a little bit distracting. So I just chose another photograph again to contrast it with, which is just against a different type of background to really emphasize the subject. So, and here's a photo. I actually took this on Monday of this week out at York River State Park. And I was very happy with this. This is the obviously a great blue heron, and looking out over the York River on this tree branch. And I looked at it and I thought, gee, I really like this photograph. And it was a cloudless blue sky. It was just perfect. It was around 7:45 in the morning. So the light was right on the heron. And I was very happy with the way this turned out. And I don't do this very often, but I wanted to just show you how different a photo can look when you replace the background. I mean, this is a very simple step in Photoshop, but all of a sudden we have the heron all of a sudden captivated by a beautiful sunrise, which in reality he wasn't. But and again, this is where photography is an art, and it's not just simply necessarily capturing what is reality. I mean, if you were submitting a photo to a photo contest or for to document a bird you've seen, you wouldn't do something like this. You would want to show an actual, very accurate photograph of the bird in its environment. But where we think of photography more as an art, then I was actually pretty happy with the way this turned out. And I just think it's a little more interesting. So, all right. Here's somebody who knew a little something about photography, George Eastman. And he said that light makes photography. Embrace light, admire it, love it, but above all, know light. Know it for all you're worth, and you will know the key to photography. I mean, that's a pretty strong statement. He was basically saying light is everything. And if you think about it, photography is capturing reflected light. It's light that's reflected off the subject. It's either from sunlight or artificial light through the lens onto the sensor or the film. And that's what vision is also. I mean, what our eyes do is they capture the reflected light. It goes through the various parts of the eye that I'm not going to try to describe right here, but and makes its way into nerves in the brain, and that's what creates the image. So light, I really can't emphasize enough how important light is. So now there are college courses given on the physics of light. I mean, how it works, the angles, the diffusion, the brightness. But for photography, I like this simple chart. And the moral of the story, the lesson here is the best time to take photographs is in the early morning and in the late afternoon. Photographers call it the golden hour. It's the hour right after sunrise and the hour before sunset. And there are a lot of reasons for this. I'll just, two of the most important ones in my opinion are that the angle of the light is more flattering when it's aimed from the side. Think about you're in a theater. Generally, the actors on stage are not lit from overhead. There's a spotlight aimed right at them. Think about the sun doing the same thing on your subject. And then the other reason is that because when the sun is low in the sky, the light has to go through all these particulates in the atmosphere, and that softens the light. It has to go through much more atmosphere to reach the subject than it does when it's up straight up in the air and coming straight down. So it's a much more, it's a softer, more flattering light. We find this at home, overhead ceiling lighting as opposed to table lamps. It's just a more flattering light. So you'll see most photographers out early in the morning or late in the day. An exception if it's a real overcast day, then it's great for photography, and it really almost doesn't matter what time of day. It can be a little challenging to take photos of active subjects like birds on a real cloudy day because it might prevent you from using a real fast shutter speed to freeze that action. But so generally, and for birders and bird photography, the early morning is just about perfect. I mean, almost all of my bird photos that I'm happy with were taken in the morning. Conversely, most of the butterfly photos I'm happy with are taken at the end of the day where the light is great, but the butterflies tend to come out in the heat of the afternoon. So a few photos just to demonstrate early morning light. This was also at York River State Park. This was last week. When you take the little stairway down to the river, and this heron was there, and I just loved the way the light looked against these grasses in the background, and you can just tell that this is in the morning. The sun was just, this is around 7:30 in the morning. The sun was just barely up. This is a great time of year where you don't have to get up too early to take advantage of early morning light. And it just illuminated the heron, but also gave just a whole softness to the background and the color. And I love the way that it turned out. And again, you can tell what time of day this was, the golden crown kinglet, and you can tell from the way the shadows are falling and the way the light is hitting the snow and the leaves that this was also an early morning shot. Again, the shadow gives it away. A red-bellied woodpecker, just fully illuminated. I mean, this is just, you couldn't do any better if you had a big spotlight to light up your subject. And again, this is obviously a tufted titmouse. And again, you can see from the shadow right where the sun was that the subject is lit up and the grass is in the background. So, and one more of the eastern bluebird. So again, it's that early morning. If you can place yourself in between the sun and your subject, you are going to have great light. Now, again, you can't always control where your subject is and where the sun is. And the reality is you can control pretty much neither of them. So you don't always have the opportunity to take photos with the light like these last few that I've shown. So here are a few where the lighting was very different, but I was pleased with the way they turned out. So again, another great blue heron. I take a lot of pictures of great blue heron. I love them. And the light here was on the other side of the subject. So it really ended up being almost a silhouette of the bird. But I was pleased with the way this turned out and the way the water looked with the light, with the sun where it was. And another red-bellied woodpecker, but here again with the sun behind and with the nut in its bill. And you know, every once in a while, it's kind of neat to take a picture where it's just completely silhouetted like this. All right, so you have subject, you have light. The next topic is focus, and I'm not going to really spend a lot of time talking about this. Anybody who takes pictures has a lot of photos like this where nothing that you want to be in focus is in focus. If you look closely, you can see the crepe myrtles on the lower right in perfect focus. If I was taking pictures of a crepe myrtle tree, that would be wonderful, but I'm not. But again, thanks to modern technology and modern cameras, which focus very quickly. Can anybody see what it is? Can anybody guess what this is in this photo? Besides a crepe myrtle? Well, there it is. So there it is. A fraction of a second later, probably I was probably on 7 frames per second. So it was probably 1/7 of a second later. And after the camera just had that much extra time to focus, we see what was in the photo, which is a ruby-throated hummingbird and an eastern tiger swallowtail on the other zinnia. And this is kind of the shot I was going for. And fortunately, both of the bird and the butterfly kind of stayed put for long enough for me to get it. So that's really all in focus. A photograph that's in focus, it's sort of, this is sort of a golden rule of photography. If it's out of focus, it's going to be a rare occasion when it's really a photo you're going to be really happy with and considered a good photograph. So. All right, and then the fourth item to cover is composition. So this is how we compose a photo. And I'm going to focus on 5 design elements and give some examples of each. There are more than this, but when it comes to this presentation, I really decided to narrow it down to these 5, and they are line, shape and form, texture and pattern, shadow and reflection, and then the use of space. So line first. Lines can be an important compositional tool. They can lead the viewer's eye to the subject, or they can frame the subject. They can keep the viewer's attention focused on the subject. This is a female summer tanager out at the botanical garden. And I just love the way that these wires framed the subject and really just provided a great natural frame. Again, the way the fence, this is actually in the same spot, and the way the line of the fence draws the viewer's eye to and past the subject, ruby-throated hummingbird. This is a favorite combination of mine. I don't know if we have any LSU graduates in the audience or on Zoom, but these would be your team colors, the American goldfinch and verbena. And this is, flowers can be a great tool to frame the subject. And in this case, the stem of the verbena leads the eye right to the treat that the goldfinch is just about to enjoy, the seeds. And so it just, again, adds a little different element to the photo and helps provide context and framing. Another example of line, this is a nice orderly line of tree swallows. And it's, but when you see a scene like this, you really need to act quickly and get the shot, because just a moment later, just like they say, he who hesitates is lost. And things changed in a hurry, and pretty soon it was just an empty wire. Another example of using nature to frame the subject, a ruby crowned kinglet, and framed by the branches and the leaves. And I just thought they added, again, a nice framing and texture and context to the photograph. All right, so the next compositional element is shape and form. And what this means is highlighting multi-dimensional objects, adding depth, and sometimes using shadow to reinforce shape also. And this is a cedar waxwing eating holly berries. And again, I love the shape of it's just so graceful, the shape of this bird just in this position, enjoying the berries. And again, use of shape and form, the brown-headed nuthatch, and this is a pretty common position that they go in, and it, again, just I thought it was just a very aesthetically pleasing shape to highlight. And the graceful shape of these great blue herons, they were, I guess, you could probably tell me exactly, but doing some sort of a mating ritual out there. And this is on the way to Jamestown Island near the isthmus. And just these very graceful, beautiful positions that they were in. And here, this Canada goose, which was excited about something, or maybe listening on his AirPods to the Village People. I couldn't help but think of, what song would you think of when you see this? Exactly, YMCA, yeah, come on. You all did that back in the day. Come on, I know that. Next time we do an icebreaker, we're gonna do this dance. I'm gonna crank this on the sound system. Okay, texture and pattern. Now, obviously photographs are two-dimensional. Real life is not two-dimensional. And so using elements of photography and of the subject to highlight texture and pattern can help add depth to a two-dimensional photograph. I love northern flickers, and I just think Mother Nature wins an award for graphic design when she designed this bird, because I mean, you've got so many different patterns and designs going on and colors, and it's almost hard to take a bad photograph of a northern flicker. And sometimes the pattern is not in the subject, but is in the work or in the adjacent part B of the subject. In this case, the tree, and the perfectly, almost perfectly. There are a couple that are not, that make it not quite perfect lines of the holes this sapsucker is drilling, but it just added a nice element of pattern. And then you have the texture of the tree. So there's, you know, just a lot going on here. And the background can also provide texture and pattern, as it does for this northern mockingbird on a wall, on a brick wall. And again, mockingbirds are so commonplace, but I liked the texture and pattern that was provided by the wall here. Or then highlighting a small part of a bird. So this is a Carolina chickadee's tail, and I don't know if you can see here if it's quite sharp enough on the screen, but to really see the detail in the feathers. I mean, you have the pattern of the tail itself, and then the pattern within each feather, and it's really a work of art. So, and then shadow and reflection. Again, you can take more commonplace subjects, and just by adding a shadow or adding a reflection, make it a little bit more interesting of a photograph. A common sandpiper, and but I just love the way the shadow was falling here, and just again adding another compositional element to the photograph. Or the reflection here of another great blue heron. And here of the reflection of the great egret with the greater yellow legs in the foreground. So generally, if there's a reflection or a shadow, I'm just going to take some pictures and see what happens, because it just makes it a little more interesting. And then, of course, nature photographers, they cast a very long shadow when they're in their natural habitat. So That is me. And yes, I did take that picture, believe it or not, with an iPhone. All right, use of space. So, and by space, I mean including empty space in the photo. So, is often an effective way of leading the viewer's eye and providing some context to the subject's surroundings, really giving a feeling of the environment. So, this is an American goldfinch, of course, and again, I could have cropped this photo or zoomed in closer to the goldfinch, and it would have been all right, but I really wanted to show, and especially with this beautiful background, to show kind of the environment that this goldfinch was in, and I felt that the use of space here provided that opportunity. Or this eastern bluebird looking out into the great beyond, peeking out of the net, the box, and again, rather than just zooming right in up close, it almost gives a sense of what the bluebird might be, feeling as she looks out of the nest into the great beyond. So there's a principle in composition which is called the rule of thirds, and I imagine many of you have probably heard of this or thought about it or seen it. And the guideline states that an image should be imagined as divided into 9 boxes with lines dividing in thirds, vertically and horizontally, and that the subject is very often more aesthetically placed in where these lines intersect, where the circles are in this diagram. And actually, many of today's cameras give the option of, when you look through the viewfinder or at the back screen, of providing grid lines to help the photographer compose the photo. And it's a very, very helpful tool. So this has been around for a long, long time. This is a painting from 1838 by J.M.W. Turner. It's at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And you can notice where the artist placed the ships, the horizon, the sun, and I don't imagine that he had grid lines on his easel, but he just knew that this was an aesthetically pleasing way to compose a painting. And you'll find now that you know about this, and maybe you have, when you go to a museum or you go to a photo exhibit, you'll see that a lot of photographs are composed this way. One of my favorite paintings in the world by Monet, The Garden at Saint Adresse. And again, this is what a great example of the rule of thirds. It's divided into horizontal thirds, and you see the French flag divided into vertical thirds. And this is just sort of the classic example of composition in the rule of thirds. It's my favorite painting. Whenever I'm in New York, I go to see this painting like I did earlier in the year. And it's just a beautiful thing. So just some examples. Another Prothonotay warbler singing. And again, I felt by placing the subject in the lower left of the image, it sort of gave the sense of the sound of the song escaping away and filling the air with its beautiful song, and in a way that might have been different if the image had been cropped or composed differently. Or this eastern bluebird with a mouthful of pine needles, again, that when the bird looking to its right, I felt it was more pleasing to place the bird about 1/3 of the way from the right-hand side of the frame. But when the bird turned a minute later to face me, here's, every rule has its exceptions. And in this case, when it was looking right at me, I felt it was more appropriate to place it right in the center. Again, this is it's a personal, subjective decision. There are lots of exceptions to this, but it's just a good guideline. Yes.
Are those decisions that you make when you're editing? I mean,
well, it depends. So the question, and I should remember to repeat the question for the people at home, is it a decision made when editing the photo or when taking it? And the answer is probably 50-50, because sometimes things happen so quickly and you're zoomed in and the subject is almost filling up the frame, so you don't have the opportunity to move it to one side or the other. But if there is the opportunity, I always leave a little extra for cropping when it comes to, when I get home and look at my photos, and then can then make the decision of where to place the subject in the frame. So it really depends. Okay, so that is composition. So a few other topics I'm going to cover today. As in real estate, location, location, location. You all know this when you go out birding. You want to go to where the birds are. And we all probably are aware of the famous quotation of Willie Sutton back in the 1800s, famous bank robber, when he was asked, why do you rob banks? He said, because that's where the money is. So why do we go to certain places? Because that's where the birds are. And they don't come to us, they do their thing and they go where they go. So I just want to share two examples of this, two favorite locations of mine. And one is to go where the food is. In this case, fruit. But it could be nuts. It could be other trees that are filled with insects. But birds need food, obviously. And one of my favorite locations over the last year or so is this spot at Jamestown Beach Park. And I think this is probably very close to where you did your big sit. This is on the upper level where the picnic tables are. And these are sumac berries, which grow there. They're growing right now. From what I've been told, they don't get really sweet until after the first frost. So they really, they have a chance to grow and multiply. And then in December, January is when the birds really descend on them. And when birds fly by and see these berries, this is what I imagine they're seeing, because it's like that for them. I mean, this is like a buffet all laid out. It's like when I go to a cocktail party and see the shrimp cocktail or the pigs in blankets, this is what they're seeing. So just a few examples of this. They attract an incredible variety of birds. This and the next 9 photos were taken from exactly the same spot. One picnic table where I would just go 4 or 5 days a week for a half hour, 40 minutes. I sit very quietly at the picnic table. The sun is coming up right behind me. I mean, this is like just a big spotlight illuminating this plot where the berries are. So, so you'll see some very commonplace birds here, and then maybe some others, but obviously northern mockingbird, lots of cardinals, bluebirds. You can see the little berry right in its mouth there. A lot of cedar waxwings. They love these berries. Northern flickers, and I love seeing them on there, and that they know just how to land, that the stem doesn't bend at all. They just land directly on top and start going at it. And then we have song sparrows and yellow-bellied sapsuckers, brown thrashers, and chickadees, and Carolina wrens. So, and there are more. I mean, it's just great light. It's you're able to get pretty close. When I took these photos, I was probably maybe 15 to 18 feet away, which is nice and close. So it's really able to get good sharp photos with great light, nice fast shutter speed to really freeze the action. So that's a real treat when you have that. Another great location, in addition to food, we know that all wildlife and all living creatures need water. So if you find a beach or a river, a lake, a pond, or even a retention pond, it's generally a reliable location for nature photography. So this is a retention pond that's just off Powhatan Creek Trail. It's near Church on the Main, if you know where that is. And I always check it when I'm walking the trail. It's just a few feet off the trail. Very often there's nothing there, but very often there is. And so this happened to be about a week when there was a lot of activity here. I just sat down nice and quietly right where I took this picture, and saw a variety of birds. Again, there's nothing really exotic here, but just excellent light, a lot of variety. A good spot to take pictures. Almost every day there was a green heron there, and they're always fun to see. And just doing a variety of activities of landing and flying and eating and grabbing something from the from the pond there and having a little nibble. This is a green heron and a muskrat in the background, and they're not actually as close as they look in this photo. Dan and I were having this conversation earlier about sometimes you have to choose which to be in focus. In this case, I really couldn't get them both in focus. So, but luckily I had the opportunity to first focus on the green heron and then just move my camera just a fraction and focus on the muskrat. So I could probably Photoshop one from one and replace the other, and I don't have the time or energy for that, but I kind of like the way these turned out. So great blue heron also doing a little, getting a little breakfast here. And there's the solitary sandpiper looking for a meal. I don't think it was able to find one that day. An eastern towhee with a little insect munching. Blue jay. And that same green heron every day I saw her. She's kind of watching me, watching her, and they're fun to watch. So again, finding a good location. I mean, it's the same as if you're going out birding, same for a photographer. You want to know the best places to go. And I often look at eBird, I mean, and just see who's seeing interesting birds, where are they seeing them, and that's where I'll go. I mean, that's kind of the best tool we have. And I'm imagining that some of you do the same thing. So being ready, being prepared. Any of you that were scouts, Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, you know about being prepared. And I don't, this quotation really is kind of, I'm not crazy about it, but I looked for a quotation about being ready. It's the only thing I could find. But when it comes to wildlife photography, nothing happens if you're not ready. And by being ready, I mean, largely having your equipment ready. And, you know, these cameras today, if you're doing wildlife photography and you're using something other than a point and shoot camera, you've got to think about the settings on your camera. You've got to think about if it's a zoom lens, how far out are you zoomed, and kind of being ready to make quick decisions and to react, because often the action happens relatively quickly. So this is I'm going to show you photos here. I'm actually going to go through these kind of quickly. There are 14 photos here. My wife, Marty, and I were, and these are some photos that were taken in Virginia Beach at First Landing State Park. But I thought they were a good example of just being ready, because I'm very thankful that I was ready. We were walking one of the trails there, and one of the birds you see quite often in Virginia Beach that I've never seen here is the yellow-crowned night heron. And they're just beautiful birds. And they love eating blue crab. And so we were walking and we saw a yellow-crowned night heron grab a blue crab from the water. And over the course of the next maybe 2 minutes, I took 436 photographs. And no, don't worry, I'm not going to show 436 photos, but when you're shooting at 7 or 10 frames per second, and you're pretty much shooting, it's like shooting a movie. So I'm going to show you 14 pictures though. And I'm just very glad that, number one, that we were in the right place at the right time. And that was just luck, obviously, but that I had my equipment ready, was able to just, look through my viewfinder, press the shutter button, and just basically keep it pressed. And it was really fun to watch. And these are in order. So I'm just going to go through these. This is just kind of the progression of what happened. I'm very glad that I was ready, and it was just a really neat thing to see. I was about 12, 14 feet away from this. So I wasn't zoomed all the way in. I mean, I was pretty close. So this is just a shot of, if you look closely, right at the middle here, where the bill is just speared straight through that crab. I mean, those herons are just fierce, the way they go spearfishing like that. And look, the heron was not looking at me, but it's just a great angle where it almost appeared that he was looking at me. And then, the claws, it was declawed. And again, there are a lot of photos taken in between these, but one thing I've discovered by watching this and looking at the photos is that the heron needs to make sure that these shells are at just the right angle before they're ingested, because if they go down the wrong way, they're going to get caught in, I guess, in the throat. And I mean, they all go down with the hard shell, and I guess it's maybe excreted as a pellet sometime later on, is what I think I've learned. But it goes down shell and all. So, and I also love seeing, if you can see here, the nictitating membrane of the heron, which whenever it was kind of playing with its food and there was an opportunity for water to go splashing, that membrane closed. And then when it was not, the membrane opened up so that the heron was, I guess, able to see more clearly. So once the claws have been ingested, then it's the body of the crab, and it takes some time to get the body of it in at just the right angle to go down the right way. And this is just a great opportunity to kind of almost see down the throat. And I didn't like that angle, so threw it back in the water, picked it back up, and just try to get it at the right angle. And it was not sure if that's the right angle or not. Look at those little sharp edges of the crab, and you can imagine if that goes down the wrong way, it's probably not going to make it all the way down. So there, I think we're getting closer to it being at the right angle. And this looks like it might be getting, and then there's the hole in the top of the crab where the bill went right through. So I think we're getting close here. If anybody's counting, I think we're almost at 14. Yeah, there we are. So it's going down just the right way, and you can see the little edges of the crab. So it'll go down nice and smoothly with those little serrated edges facing away, so that it goes down. It's like a barbed hook, but this is going down the right way. And then it was all over, and I was able to breathe again and hyperventilating a little bit. My wife had to get up the smelling salts, and couldn't wait to get home and see what I had. So that was fun. But again, the moral here is just to be prepared, and there've been plenty of times I wasn't. So I'm not going to talk about those, but this is at one time that I was. So every picture tells a story, and I love pictures that tell stories. And photographs obviously capture just one very brief little moment in time. And sometimes photos make you think and wonder, well, what happened right before that picture was taken, or what happened right after? And that is largely left up to the viewer's imagination. And I can tell you in this case, the hummingbird went elsewhere, and the butterfly, the cloudless sulfur, kind of stayed where it was. But I don't think it was very successful in drinking out of there. And pretty soon the butterfly flew away too. But just kind of like this, and thought it had a little bit of a story to tell. And here, spoiler alert, she stuck the landing perfectly on that pole. Now, seeing this bald eagle, I wondered what the rest of the story was. I wondered where he got that huge branch, and then I wondered where he was going with that big branch. And I never found out where he got the branch, but for the rest of the story, I was able to follow the eagle and right to where it was going. And I imagine a lot of you probably know where this eagle was going. And I don't know if this is the largest, but it's got to be one of the largest eagle's nests in the area. This is the one at Jamestown Settlement, which you can see pretty well from the top of the berm at Jamestown Beach Park. And I'm sure you all know this, but I do this presentation for audiences that don't know nearly as much about birds, but that these nests can become up to 8 feet wide and 13 feet deep, and that they can weigh a ton or more, and they can be built over years and years. I don't know, does anybody know how old this nest is? It's got to be years old. I mean, and it's obviously still being added to, because that branch I showed you was brought right back to this nest. So here's a red-tailed hawk leaving its comfortable branch. So now that in and of itself isn't much of a story, but if you look in the upper right-hand corner, and I'm going to try this, Nancy, if I screw up the presentation, but oh, there we go, is a blue jay, which was making a racket and was causing this red-tailed hawk to leave its very comfortable perch. So just a little bit of a story being told by a photograph. I had never seen a brown thrasher doing this, and was wondering why it was doing this. It was making circles in the ground and kind of going back and forth. And if you look on the lower left of this photo down here, you see a black rat snake, which was, I'd never found the nest of the brown thrasher, but I'm imagining it was somewhere in the vicinity, and that maybe there was just some being protective about the young or the eggs, and trying to keep that snake away. So, and remember in the movie Jaws how effective that movie was, Spielberg, with just showing the little fin, the little shark's fin. That's all you saw was the fin gliding through the water. Everybody knows what this is, right? Pileated woodpecker, and so I mean, I've got thousands of photos of pileated woodpeckers, but I loved just seeing this one little bit on the other side of the tree, and that's all you really need to see, and it tells you all you need to know. Here's sort of a classic what happened next photo, the hummingbird and the I think it's a carpenter bee on the zinnia, and you know, from looking at a photo like this, you could imagine that the hummingbird just really took its time thinking about, what am I going to do? Am I going to land or not? Or is this bee ever going to leave? In reality, it took about probably 1/20th of a second for the hummingbird to take a quick look and kind of go somewhere else. Which leads me to another quotation. Again, this is someone who knew a little something about photography, Ansel Adams, who said, there are always two people in every picture, the photographer and the viewer. And it's about what the photographer would like to convey, about what the photographer would like the viewer to see when they look at a photo. But then it's up to the viewer to interpret the photo the way that they will. And that the creator of the photograph is really, no pun intended, but not in the picture anymore by the time that's happening. And so that's what makes photography, I think, as much of an art as it is anything else. So I want to mention just two books that have meant a lot to me. The first is a more contemporary book, which is called Composition. And it's a great book for covering the topics that I mentioned today and others relating to how to think about composition as you're creating photographs. And then the other book, again, Ansel Adams here. This is one of a series of books. You can see the number 4 on here. I think it's 6 books. I'm not sure if they're in print, but they're available either through Abe Books or Amazon or great bookstore. And it's an incredible series of books. And his book on natural light photography is really a classic. And it's something that every photographer ought to look at. I would like to thank 2 people, one of whom happens to be here today, that had a big impact on my avocation as a wildlife photographer. After I retired, I took 2 classes at Christopher Wren, what used to be called Christopher Wren. The first was a class on photography given by Norm Richter on the left. I don't know if any of you knew Norm, but he was just a great guy. Sadly, he passed away last year, but he gave a great series of classes at Christopher Wren. And then around the same time, I took Bill Williams classes at Christopher Wren on birding, and sort of the combination of these two, it's like Reese's peanut butter cups. So we have chocolate and peanut butter, and I won't say who's who, but the combination of these 2 classes really got me excited about combining my lifelong hobby of photography with the more recent interest in bird watching, and which has kind of brought me where we are today. So what I'd like to do, I have more photos to show, and I'm gonna look at my timekeeper over here, but I would like to, just in case I'm out of time in this presentation, which is just about an hour, I could just see if there are any questions now, and if not, I'll show more pictures. But yes, we have one right here.
Do you use auto or manual focus?
Do I use auto or manual focus?
Yeah.
I use autofocus. I mean, the thought of using manual focus, yeah, it would be, there's enough to think about when you're taking pictures of moving subjects and thinking about the shutter speed and the aperture and the zoom lens and the lighting and other settings on the camera, to let the camera do that. And with today's cameras, they're incredibly good at finding the subject and focusing quickly. So I use autofocus, yes.
Do you shoot from a monopod or a tripod?
Do I use a monopod or a tripod? You know, I don't use either one. And again, with today's cameras and with the vibration reduction built in today's cameras and the ability to shoot at high ISO speeds so that you can have a pretty fast shutter speed, I like to move around. And when you're taking pictures of moving subjects, I think if I were, the one time I used a monopod was when I was taking pictures of that red-headed woodpecker's nest. And I usually use my tripod for that and kept the camera right on the nest for an hour and a half, and just was able to take the pictures as the birds were entering or leaving the nest. But other than that, if you are moving around and trying to track a moving subject, I find I can't be quite nimble enough with a monopod or tripod. So can I ask Anne if there are any questions on chat?
Nope, they're none. Nope, they're none.
Okay. Anything else here? Should I show a few more photos? Is that all right? Or Nancy?
Yeah, it's not a question, but an observation, and how on earth you got all those kinglet shots. I think that's the hardest creature on the planet to photograph. Is that just taking many and having
I don't think I have a slide here with the word patience on it, but yes, it's taking many photos. It's again, the equipment today, where you can take 7 or 10 frames per second, and you could just keep that shutter button pressed, and with tracking, focusing so that it follows a moving subject when the kinglet's going from branch to branch. And, you know, so, I mean, it's not uncommon that I'll get home and have taken 400 or 500 photos, and there may be a few that don't end up in the great pixel heaven, you know, as it were. So yes, and they are challenging. Boy, do they move around quickly. So, okay, well, I'll show a few more then.
One more question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Another question.
I was just going to ask whether you have a holy grail photo that you're pursuing, a bird that you haven't captured in the way you want to, or
Yeah.
a destination that you'd like to travel.
So the question is about what's on my bucket list for bird photography or nature photography. And it's interesting. I mean, it changes every season. So I'm going to get to one that I'm going to show you in a little bit, and I'll just tell you what it was. I've taken a lot of photos of osprey, and but I had never gotten a really good photo I was pleased with of osprey feeding its young. So it's just one that I hadn't gotten. So that was on my list, and I was able to check it off this year. So you'll see that. And yeah. So they're always just, whether it's, for me, it's not necessarily as much a bird I haven't seen, unless I see something on eBird. And if I see that Shirley's seen it or Bill has seen it, then I want to try to go out and get some pictures of it. But it's generally more of an activity of a bird, a bird doing a certain thing. And I might be inspired by, there's a great Facebook group called Birding Virginia. I think a lot of you probably look at that site, and it's birds, 9,000 members of posting photos of birds around the state of Virginia. And it's a great place to get inspired of people seeing birds doing different things and say to yourself, well, gee, I want to see a bird doing that. So there are always items on that list, yes. Okay.
Jim, there
yes.
is a question. There is a question from chat. What is the longest lens you use to take these photos?
Okay, the longest lens I use. Well, I would say 90% of the photos I'm showing today are taken with one lens and camera combination, and it's the Nikon D500 with a 200 to 500 zoom lens. So it's 500 millimeters is the lens. And what the D500 is a little technical, but it's got a little bit smaller sensor size. So it's the equivalent of in the old days of 35 millimeter photography of using a 750 millimeter lens. That's what it captures, the area that it captures if I'm zoomed all the way out. So what that lets me do is, if the bird is maybe 50 or 60 feet away, I can get pretty close with some pretty good detail with that combination, especially if it's good light and that sort of thing. If it's further away than that, it becomes a little more challenging to get a level of detail that of some of the pictures we're seeing today. And I use a zoom lens 200 to 500. I would say 80% of the time it's zoomed all the way out to 500. It's rare that, you know, with birds, you just can't often get that close to them that you have to zoom in close to them. So, okay, so here's another, again, Ansel Adams, 12 significant photographs in any 1 year is a good crop. Now, what he considered a significant photograph is something different than how I'm using the vernacular today. With today's equipment, almost unlimited exposures on a memory card, 7 to 10 frames per second. And I think about it, if any of you saw the exhibit at the VMFA of Ansel Adams photography, but they did a great job of showing how he took his photographs. I mean, the size of his equipment, the kind of film he used, these big 8x10 sheets that went in the camera one at a time. And I mean, it was an ordeal to take a photograph. Of course, he didn't know anything different, but we're a little bit spoiled. So where I said I could go out and, you know, have to go home and look at 500 or 600 photos, Ansel Adams, I mean, he went home and looked at 2 or 3. And of course, they were incredibly well thought out and well planned. And but it is, you know, when a photographer, the feeling as a photographer, when you take a really good special photo, it doesn't happen that often. So you do feel good about it. So, great quotation, fish gotta swim, birds gotta fly. And the moral here is, as a photographer, I try to take pictures of birds doing what they do. Of course, you can't tell them what to do, but I like to see what they are naturally doing and to capture that on film. So what birds seem to do more than anything else is eat. I mean, they're eating all the time. And if they're not eating, they're looking for food, or they're protecting their food, or they're keeping another animal away from their food. So this is a bald eagle over at James River enjoying a recently caught fish. And another group told me that it really took guts to post this photo. So I don't know if you would agree with that. Let's see. Oops. Those were guts. I wasn't able to highlight it, but okay. So again, I just love getting photos of birds eating. This is an American robin eating holly berries, and a downy woodpecker with a little ant in its bill, tiny little ant, and a pileated woodpecker looking for carpenter ants. And again, this group, you probably know this, but the carpenter ants comprise about 60% of the diet of pileated woodpeckers. And I did read, although I didn't note it, how many carpenter ants a pileated woodpecker eats on an average day, and it is mind-boggling. It's amazing that there are any ants left. Of course, double-crested cormorant doesn't eat as many fish as a pileated woodpecker eats ants. It doesn't take many fish like this one to satisfy the appetite. That was a big one. And I've also been told that a cormorant, after eating a fish like this, is unable to fly for a period of time, which is great for a photographer because they are just sort of right there and they just don't go too far. So again, birds eating, prothonotary warbler with a mouthful. And along with eating comes feeding. So this is along the Powhatan Creek Trail, and Shirley and I and others had the opportunity a year, I guess it was last year or the year before. We have 6 or 7 warbler boxes along the trail there, but occasionally they'll build a nest in a tree, and this was a real treat that it was within view of the bridge, and so I was able to get some shots of mom and dad feeding the little ones here, and that was just something special. Here's the picture I was mentioning that was sort of on my to-do list for this season of osprey feeding. This is the platform that's in the James River. And if you go to the old pier, where I guess the old ferry used to land, it's right next to the ferry pier, but it's the old pier. People fish off of it. And in the morning, it's just wonderful. The light, sun coming up behind you. And this platform is only about 40 or 50 feet from the end of that little piece of land. It's a great spot to photograph osprey. And this was just a little feeding going on. And what I like about this is the child number 2 on the right doesn't appear too happy about having to wait his turn, but the other one was getting a mouthful. And then just these are actually backyard birds feeding, Carolina chickadees and some eastern bluebirds. And when you get a chance to see or photograph birds feeding each other, that's just a little bit of a treat. And then preening, of course, that's something birds do quite a bit. I love watching that, some of the contortions and positions. And I think we probably all know why they do it, to spread the oil on their feathers and to clean their feathers. And so this is, again, one of our prothonotary warblers preening, and looks like it's looking at me while it's doing that, but it's really not. And hummingbird doing the same thing. And a pileated woodpecker. This was just last week, keeping itself nice and clean. Just some other activities birds do: nest building. Also on Powhatan Creek Trail, the blue-gray gnatcatcher using lichen and spider silk to create just a beautiful nest. And when you can see this and you're not too far away and the light is right, and they just go back and forth, the male and the female, getting this nest put together in an amazingly short period of time. And then singing. I mean, especially certain times of the year or in the spring when seeking a mate or other activity and looking for each other. There's a whole lot of singing going on, this northern parula. Or seeing birds just hanging around, like this red-bellied woodpecker. And I love seeing their belly. I mean, you wonder, most of the time, you wonder why it's called a red-bellied woodpecker until you see this angle, and then it becomes pretty obvious. Now, sometimes you see an activity taking place and you're not really sure what's going on, so you research it. I'm sure you all do this, and you have your books, or you have the internet, or each other, various websites to research. So what I saw here, and you can see, is this tufted titmouse. Wait a second. Plucking hair off of a sleeping raccoon. So this raccoon was sound asleep in this cavity of the tree, and this titmouse was going back and forth, plucking little bits of hair. I had never heard of this or never seen it. Now, it turns out it's not an uncommon activity. It turns out titmice will do the same with dogs and cats and humans. And maybe that's where they get the expression feathering one's nest, but they're doing it to bring soft materials back to the nest. And the raccoon occasionally will wake up, and I got lucky because the raccoon kind of was like, oh, what's going on back there? And by the way, it quickly went back to sleep. I mean, it did not faze this raccoon one bit, having little bits of its fur plucked off itself. But titmouse just kept on going around his business. Another example of research and where a photograph is very helpful as opposed to just seeing it with one's own eyes. But we, as a master naturalist, one of the things we learned that makes birds unique is that they don't have teeth. I don't know if there's a bird that has teeth. I hope there's not, because I just said that confidently. But they do have something called tomia, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Am I pronouncing it correctly? It's made out of cartilage. It's very hard. You can see on the goose's tongue and on its lower bill. Oops. And what that does is allows them to pull pull up grasses and gnaw and chew at those grasses to make them easier to digest. But this is something, obviously if the goose hadn't given me this look, and if I hadn't been able to get a picture like this and then get home and research and understand what I was looking at, I would never have known this. So it's, it's an educational experience. Okay. Here's another, this was actually taken in the same spot where I saw the titmouse plucking the raccoon. This is on the bridge, the big, what they call the Warbler Bridge on Powhatan Creek Trail. This is a red-tailed hawk, and it was a beautiful picture, just the hawk perched in the highest spot, kind of looking at everything around him. But then all of a sudden, I see a blue-gray gnatcatcher doing flybys and harassing the hawk until the hawk just went somewhere else. And by going home and kind of doing a little bit of research, realized that the gnatcatcher likely had a nest nearby and was likely protecting its young, or protecting, I don't think it would be protecting a food source necessarily. I don't think they might probably share the same diet, but maybe protecting its eggs or its young. And this was another case of kind of being prepared, and the whole thing took maybe a minute, but another situation where I probably took 100 or 150 photos and got a couple of good ones. Something we've probably all seen, but these are two male eastern bluebirds fighting, and they were really fighting. I mean, this was not just, a little pecking at each other. This wasn't practice. I mean, this was a real fight. And after I did some research on it, I read that this fight, and they were fighting over a mate, a potential mate, a female, and they can sometimes lead to the crippling or death of the loser of the fight. And that did not happen in this case, but they were going at it. And this was a Carolina wren dust bathing. I love that. I guess just getting itself clean on a very dry day. And again, there was a bird bath. This is in our backyard. There was a bird bath very close to here, but just chose to clean itself of I guess, insects or other objects by rolling around in the mulch. And I kind of like watching it. All right, hummingbirds. I love hummingbirds. And I was asked what's on my sort of bucket list for photographs, and every summer there's at least one or two. I want to see a hummingbird feeding off of a different type of flower, or I want to see a hummingbird doing something different or in a different stage of development. And so they're just always fun. They're always a challenge. They move quickly. Obviously, their wings beat at up to 3 or 4. Well, I'm going to try to remember this. Does anybody know how fast a hummingbird's wings beat? I know you have to have about a 4,000 of a second to capture them. So it's many times per second they're beating. And this is a sage plant, but I love taking photos of them almost no matter what they're doing. There's with some cleome and pentos, just some great pollinator attractors. Buttonbush, one of the few plants that's not red or pink that I see a hummingbird on. This is actually our wildflower of the year. Is that right? From the Native Plant Society. And this is at the Botanical Garden. And it's the only time I've seen a hummingbird feeding on a buttonbush. One time, and a lot of butterflies, but the one and only time I've seen a hummingbird. And heading into the gladiolus, and what I like about this, because I mean the hummingbird did feed on the bloom afterwards, and I got lots of pictures of that. But here, where it's just heading in with all the space around it, and it kind of reminds me of Ken Conger has this great photo of a bear with the feeding on salmon, and the salmon is just, on its way into the mouth of the bear, space all around it. And so I like that sort of the space around the bird here. Getting ready to enjoy what's left of zinnia. And of course, sometimes they get more than they bargained for. And I think a lot of us see this happening, but it was kind of neat to get a photo of it. This is bee balm. And when the little petal comes off, and you can imagine what the bird is thinking at this point. Okay, macro photography. And this is a little bit different take on macro photography. The definition of macro photography is when the size of the subject is larger than life size, so that it's showing detail that wouldn't be able to be seen by the naked eye. And a photographer generally thinks of macro photography using a macro lens and getting very close, taking photos of insects or flowers or other small objects from a very close distance and using a special lens. But there's an element of macro photography, which is using a telephoto lens, where you're able to get close enough to, again, really focus on a level of detail that you wouldn't otherwise be able to see, because we can't get this close to a bird to see this type of detail. And even if we got this close, I don't know about all of you, but I certainly, with my eyes, would not be able to see this level of detail. So here's a brown thrasher and a red-bellied woodpecker. And again, just a couple of examples of where I was able, sometimes you're in a location, you're sitting or you're standing, and a bird will land near you and not really see you. Or sometimes I have found out of a car window, the bird won't see you as well, and you're able to get very close if you're somewhere near where birds like to go. Our state bird, female northern cardinal, same thing, of just a level of detail that you don't normally get. So I think I talked about research a little bit, whether it's books or other experts. We all have people, maybe we share photos, or that when we have questions, we ask them, what is this bird doing? What kind of a bird is this? And the internet has become a great resource for that. Sometimes along the trail, and I want to give credit to a group of people, including Rick Brown here, who have erected these informational signs along Bassett Trace over at CW, which is really a great tool, especially for people who are just learning to see what sort of trees or birds they're seeing along the trails. So that officially concludes my presentation. So.
We're going to go to.
So if there are any other questions, I don't know how much time I have here, but I have as much as, if you have any questions you'd like to ask. So now, okay, there we go. Hello. Any questions? I guess Zoomers could chat, or if anybody has any, and that's fine either way. So yes, surely.
How much time do you spend in front of your computers?
How much time do I spend in front of my computer screen? That is a great question. I won't say it's a sore subject, but it very often, and it's for a good, I love doing it. And I grew up in a dark room. I had a dark room when I was 10 or 11 years old, all the way through high school and college. And I would answer the same way then, probably more time, because I was processing my film, and then I was, enlarging and contact sheets and all that. So, but it's very often more time spent in front of the computer than I have spent outside. So if I didn't enjoy doing it, it would be more problematic than it is. But I don't, there are certain images that I spend a lot of time on to try to get them right as I can make them. And then there are many others that I just sort of keep, and I put a name on the file with the species name and where I saw them and the date. And then they're there for future reference if I need a photo, and then I'll spend the time. So, I mean, it's like anything else. You can spend 2 or 3 hours, editing a photo. I don't really ever spend that much time, but it adds up. It does add up. So. All right. Well, thank you all.
Well, thank you so much.
I'm going to just leave everything if that's right. Not
Yes,
just,
that's fabulous. That was brilliant.
Oh,
One more,
thank you.
Nancy, one more chat
Oh.
comment.
Okay.
Fantastic presentation, Jim. Thank you so much for the level of detail and information,
Oh.
and of course, gorgeous photos.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think the series of the yellow crown night heron and the blue crab was, that's award winning. I would say they all are. So just a couple of brief announcements.